Good evening. This research presentation involves the Federal Aviation Administration's response to the massive rise in the development of unmanned aerial systems and the steps being taken toward their integration into the national airspace. This presentation will also identify potential courses of action that the FAA may also take that will streamline the process of integrating UAS into the NAS. Currently, although UAS have legitimate benefits that can be provided, they operate in a very limited capacity and are restricted to what airspace they are allowed to conduct missions in within the NAS. Safety is the primary concern as to why UAS have not been completely integrated. The FAA, along with NASA and other entities that are explored throughout this research project, are working diligently to solve safety issues and procedures surrounding the integration of UAS into the NAS. This presentation will determine what factors are not currently being met and will provide potential COAs that could be taken to safely and operationally integrate UAS. In an article from 2015, NASA stated, before a single UAS can join the NAS, Federal Aviation Administration regulations require that it be able to safely and reliably detect and avoid other aircraft. The FAA is currently working to ensure that UAS are integrated into the NAS and have appropriate safety measures in place before this occurs. A driving concern behind the UAS integration is the safety risk posed to manned aircraft within the NAS. The necessity of UAS integration is essential to be afforded the ability to perform missions of vital importance to national security and defense emergency management science and to enable commercial applications. The ability of UAS to fulfill these roles and significantly reduce risk to human life provides a justification to the FAA to devise a strategy that will safely integrate UAS into the NAS. Routine access by UAS into the NAS still remains unrealized. To begin the presentation, the history behind early unmanned aerial systems will be discussed. In years prior, military purposes were the main usage for UAS. From conducting security and reconnaissance, UAS have fulfilled varying roles in order to fulfill intelligence requirements on the battlefield. The Department of Defense currently operates some UAS within NAS on a very restricted and limited basis. As the DoD has had very specific and stringent guidance on the domestic use of UAS, on rare occasions, DoD operates UAS domestically in support of requests from federal or state civilian authorities. DoD only conducts these operations with the approval of the Secretary of Defense. The guidelines and restrictions on UAS operations currently must be maintained and followed in order for the safety of all aircraft within the NAS. Despite these restrictions within the NAS for military UAS, the public tends to have a distrust with UAS due to the applications that have been observed from the military's utilization of UAS on the battlefield with regard to the UAS capabilities. For many, their only experience with these vehicles comes from media reports about them being used for military intelligence gathering and defense. Those images, coupled with the privacy and safety concern, is causing some to fear using them back here at home. These fears, however, ultimately are not a sole reason for preventing UAS integration. The technology required to ensure safety of all aircraft within NAS has been completely developed for UAS integration. Therefore, UAS restrictions will be discussed as they have not been removed, as the safety of flight within NAS is the FAA's main priority. With some of the early roles of UAS discussed, next the current restrictions will be discussed. When analyzing restrictions that are currently placed on the private sector within the NAS, UASs have not yet been granted the opportunity to fully integrate. UASs within the private sector currently have limited airspace they may operate in, and they must be granted approval within the airspace prior to any operations. Private sector UASs, when approved for flight, are only allowed to fly below 400 feet and must have proper certifications for the aircraft to be flown within Class G airspace. The restrictions placed upon UASs must be followed to ensure safety across the NAS, and when recreational users fly UASs without the knowledge and certification needed, they do not realize the risk they are potentially creating. The FAA stated in early 2017 that reports of unmanned aircraft sightings from pilots, citizens, and law enforcement officials have increased dramatically over the past 2 years. The FAA now receives more than 100 such reports each month. The FAA also reported there were 1,274 such reports from February through September last year. The FAA has partnered with the private sector entities to develop educational information. These efforts have led to the development of a downloadable app called Before You Fly that is available on smartphones for UAS operators in hopes of educating the public on requirements that must be followed to ensure safety within NAS. Integrating UAS means integrating operators into the aviation culture and mindset. It means creating general awareness that these devices are not toys and the consequences of misuse can be serious. Considering the background surrounding UASs and NAS, next, the research from the UAS industry, the FAA, and NASA will be discussed. As stated within the introduction, before a single UAS can join the NAS, Federal Aviation Administration regulations require that it be able to safely and reliably detect and avoid other aircraft. This is where many organizations within the UAS community, such as the FAA and NASA, are focusing their efforts on the development of UAS technology. NASA has been identified as the research lead on developing the technology that will be necessary to provide the infrastructure support for UAS integration within NAS. In 2015, NASA began to develop the Detect and Avoid Alerting for Unmanned Systems, or DALIUS algorithm, that will enable UAS aircraft to stay well clear of other aircraft and even potentially identify and alternate to find a safer flight path. The DALIUS doesn't just relay passive alerts, though, it also sees safe paths out of potential dangerous situations. As you progress into an encounter, the DALIUS will provide information on where you should go to avoid other aircraft. NASA's near-term goal is the development and demonstration of a possible future UAS traffic management, or UTM, system that could safely enable low-altitude airspace and UAS operations. Working alongside many committed government, industry, and academic partners, NASA is leading the research, development, and testing that is taking place in a series of activities called Technology Capability Levels, each increasing in complexity. UTM TCL-1 concluded field testing in August 2015 and is undergoing additional testing at an FAA site. Technologies in this activity addressed operations for agriculture, firefighting, and infrastructure monitoring, with a focus on geofencing, altitude rules of the road, and scheduling of vehicle trajectories. UTM TCL2, completed in October 2016, leveraged TCL1 results and focused on beyond visual line of sight operations in sparsely populated areas. Researchers tested technologies that allowed dynamic adjustments to availability of airspace and contingency management. UTM TCL3 is scheduled for January 2018 and will leverage TCL2 results and focus on testing technologies that maintain safe spacing between cooperative and non-cooperative UAS over moderately populated areas. UTM TCL4, with dates to be determined, will leverage TCL3 results and focus on UAS operations in higher density urban areas for tasks such as news gathering and package delivery. It will also test technologies that could be used to manage large-scale contingencies. NASA's UTM Technologies Research and Development is taking place in collaboration with the FAA. Results of the research in the form of airspace integration requirements are expected to be transferred from NASA to the FAA in 2019 for further testing. The private sector growth that has been observed within the UAS industry is pushing the FAA to strive for quicker and safer integration of UASs into the NAS. The FAA has consulted with the private sector to develop a framework towards integration and continues to do so as UASs continue to be developed for broader missions and more complex requirements. Currently, commercial and governmental organizations have two options to conduct small UAS operations. The first is that the entity must ensure the UAS pilot adheres to the FAA rules and regulations prescribed in 14 CFR that outlines the requirements needed in order to become a legal UAS operator. The other option is that the organization obtain a blanket public certificate of waiver or authorization. This waiver allows an organization to be permitted to operate nationwide flights in Class G airspace at or below 400 feet, self-certification of the USA pilot, and the option to obtain emergency COAs under special circumstances. These regulations are also changing with progress in research and development and should also be monitored for any changes that may arise in the coming months. At a conference in July 2016, the FAA announced that universities and students would no longer need an FAA Section 333 exemption or any other authorization to fly, provided they follow the rules for model aircraft. This is a significant impact to academia, as research conducted at universities offering a UAS program can now educate students, provide hands-on UAS training, and potentially develop better solutions for government and private sector problem sets without fear of violating FAA Part 107 regulation. Many private sector entities will be more likely to invest in university research surrounding UAS integration that is conducted surrounding UAS solutions for their problem sets with the release of this ruling. The private sector is looking to UASs to solve many different problem sets that they may still have yet to be named, and in some cases it is not aware of the policies and guidance that is needed in order to start a UAS program. Private and public sector components must realize that when purchasing a UAS, they are essentially setting up a UAS program within their organization. Having education initiatives such as the initiative that the Commercial Drone Alliance looks to provide the public will begin to change the public perception on small UASs that these aircraft are toys. Awareness and education needs to be at the forefront of UAS integration, and when developing a UAS program, an organization needs to take the time to define what the scope of the operations they plan to employ with its UAS program. From utilizing UAS for the potential of package delivery, as Amazon wishes to use UASs for, to aiding in emergency situations, it would behoove an organization to know what type of operation they plan to employ their UAS program for. The FAA has not released any guidelines or templates on how a UAS program policy should look, but having a plan will allow an organization to be granted a COA much more quickly and will provide a response for any questions that may arise from FAA officials. UASs are not toys, and they are aircraft that must be treated as such. While NASA works to develop the necessary technology and infrastructure to support UAS integration into the NAS, it is necessary for the FAA to take a stronger initiative towards public education on SUAS. The FAA has stated that this is at the forefront of the integration efforts for UASs into the NAS. However, with the dramatic increase in UAS sightings observed within the past 2 years, it is evident that the current education programs are not working efficiently enough. Education on the dangers and hazards must be proactive and not reactive to a situation involving UASs that could potentially lead to a loss of life when involving manned aircraft. The public has the ability to purchase a SUAS from anywhere and begin operating the aircraft within minutes, without any prior knowledge of the dangers they could be presenting to manned aircraft. This is careless on the operator's part, but with the UAS sightings dramatically increasing year by year, it is necessary to apply stricter standards to SUAS vendors and manufacturers. Currently, the same requirements of model aircraft apply to hobbyists wishing to fly SUAS. It is clear that the regulations are not being understood, and this is the cause for a stricter policy regarding SUAS sales that should be put into place. The FAA administrator stated that several UAS manufacturers have started to voluntarily include "know before you fly" safety literature with their product packaging. This should be a requirement of all UAS manufacturers, not a voluntary notion. With these litigious requirements in place, it will make it a lot more clear that UAS are not toys and that they have serious ramifications for misuse. These requirements may appear to be strict, but they provide the education that will be necessary to ensure the safety of all aircraft within the NAS is continually being achieved. Recently, emergency relief efforts have been delayed due to unauthorized SUAS usage that is conducted without malice but ultimately leads to the loss of millions of dollars as well as the irreplaceable loss of life. While UAS integration in the NAS is a high priority, ensuring hobbyists flying SUASs within NAS have proper education on requirements also needs to be addressed. As the FAA works alongside many entities to develop a UTM, it will not be the sole solution to UAS problem sets once it has been released for the UAS integration. Other recommendations that come from within industry should be listened to, and this is critical that the FAA keeps the analytic exchanges open that they have created, to provide multiple perspectives within this problem set to develop further solutions towards UAS integration.